struck the South American nation of Venezuela. This is elsewhere. In the Middle East, the administration all but admitting defeat in the effort so far to end the brutal fighting in Syria. Nearly 150,000 are dead, millions forced from their homes, and no solution in sight there. And the long and complicated negotiations over Iran's dangerous disputed nuclear weapons program are beginning again. But already the reports suggest little hope for success there, raising brand new questions about the president's foreign policy and what it means for America. Mark Thiessen is a former presidential speechwriter for President George W. Bush and a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And Ralph Peters is a Fox News strategic analyst and a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel who was trained specifically as a Soviet-Russian analyst. Gentlemen, good to see you. Let me start with you, Ralph, on the president coming out and what's happening in the Ukraine. And I know a lot of people are saying, Ukraine, what's happening? Why do we care what's happening in Ukraine? If you can speak to that question, and the president yet again coming out and using the term red line, saying we're going to have to draw lines here.
Well, Ukraine is actually more important than Syria, despite all the bloodshed. It's important because it's part of Europe, and Vladimir Putin is trying to gobble it back up. The western two-thirds of Ukraine has always belonged to Europe until the Bolsheviks took it over and starved millions of Ukrainians to death in the 1920s and 30s. Ukrainians don't want to be Putin's slaves. Megan, when the Obama administration today said they want Russia more engaged in Ukraine, this entire production has been brought to you by Vladimir Putin, who is pulling all the strings behind the Yanukovych government. Russia wants to reclaim Ukraine, to grab it back up, and it matters because it would increase Russia's strategic power enormously. Now, our president said today that there would be consequences. When have there ever been consequences? In Libya, Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, when Karzai betrays us, when Putin plays with Snowden, and crosses us on Syria and Iran, there are never consequences. Megan, if this administration had a symbol, it should be a duck, because this president has ducked responsibility for everything.
Let's listen to what the president, how he actually put it when trying to warn the folks in Ukraine, the government there, and others about their behavior. Listen.
We expect the Ukrainian government to show restraint, to not resort to violence in dealing with peaceful protesters. We've said that we also expect peaceful protesters to remain peaceful. And we'll be monitoring very carefully the situation. There will be consequences if people step over the line.
And let me talk to you about that, Mark, because we hear that phrase again. If people step over the line, there will be consequences. The same, almost identical language as he used in Syria, which, he was so criticized for because there were no real consequences, and Syria is a real problem now, and they're not complying with the agreement to turn over their nuclear or their chemical weapons. And so people are saying, is he being perceived as feckless? Why would he choose the same language as somebody who dealt in presidential language for a living? Why would he?
Because it never means anything. Because it's something he has nothing to accomplish. So he has to say something. So he says consequences. It's the go-to word when you have no policy. I mean, look, this is a president who threatened consequences if Bashar Assad used chemical weapons on his people. 13 chemical attacks later, Bashar Assad is still in power. He's hiding his chemical weapons. He's not complying with his international commitments. There are 150,000 people dead, and the CIA says that Al Qaeda has reconstituted a base in a safe haven in Syria that it could use to attack us here at home.
And Clapper, our Intl chief, he says that Assad's grip on power has only strengthened over the past year.
Absolutely. Consequences. So if the Russians are looking at the consequences in Syria, they're pretty comfortable right now. There are no consequences of this administration. Nobody fears us in the world. Our enemies don't fear us. Our allies don't believe we have their backs. I mean, look, every time the president talks about foreign policy, it's to tell us that we got to focus on nation building at home. No one fears a nation in retreat. We're in retreat in Iraq. We're in retreat in Syria. We're in retreat in Afghanistan. In Iraq, Al Qaeda has reconstituted all the land, all the cities, all the safe havens that were taken at the price of American heroes, the blood of American heroes. In Afghanistan, the Taliban are on a murderous rampage, waiting for us to do the same thing, withdraw and quit the country. Iran is totally unafraid of us having any consequences for the pursuit of a nuclear weapon. There are no consequences for anything this administration does, and so weakness is provocative. When you project weakness, people don't fear you, and they do what they want.
The president and his administration are coming under fire, Ralph, because Secretary Kerry just came out and said that he believes climate change is perhaps the world's most fearsome weapon of mass destruction. I mean, in the face of all this that we are seeing, and it's led, I think, Newt Gingrich to call for him to step down. But the point is, do they have their eye on the ball? And what of this charge that we basically have no teeth anymore? We are not feared the way we used to be and the way we may need to be.
We don't even have false teeth. You know, I have to say that as far as the climate change brouhaha in Indonesia goes, you can't win the climate change debate on either side. It's too loaded. But, you know, there is real pollution in the world that we do have to address. So I don't have a huge problem with that, except when he starts saying it's the worst weapon of mass destruction. China, the United States, Russia, we have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world with some left over. So I'd say that's a slightly larger threat. But again, you know, I don't understand why conservatives aren't for conservation. But this administration is going to walk away from Ukraine, let Putin gobble it back up, and it is going to be a tragedy for freedom everywhere.
Oh, we'll continue to monitor it. Again, they say there's a truce, but reports on the ground are, well, where is it? There's no evidence of it so far. Gentlemen, good to see you.
Thanks,
Thank
Megan.
you, Megan.